Everyone, Hamadakipi Chante Washte Nape Chius Apido, Iushkian Wichiankapi, Dallas Goldtooth Emaki Apido, Indigenous Environmental Network at Chtawanido. My name is Dallas Goldtooth. I'm an organizer. I'm the Keep It in the Ground campaigner for the Indigenous Environmental Network, and I want to invite or welcome each and every one of you to this webinar. It's part 3 in a 4-part series, collaboration between the Indigenous Environmental Network and our sister organization, Indigenous Climate Action, who are based in Canada and North America, or in the United States. Our respective organizations work and support grassroots Indigenous communities all across Turtle Island, AKA what is so-called North America. And our efforts are to support the fights for environmental justice and climate justice. And we decided together to host these series of webinars to help provide information about not only in response to the COVID-19 crisis, but also how are Indigenous communities responding? What are Indigenous communities across the globe doing to rise to the occasion to protect their lands, to protect their communities, and to protect the inherent sacredness of Mother Earth herself. So we're here, part 3. The theme of this webinar is compassion. The understanding is that we have to really move forward in responding to this pandemic with the utmost compassion for our peoples. How are we protecting ourselves? How are we taking care of those most vulnerable in the communities that we work with? And what are we doing in response to outside attacks or outside, attacks on our sovereignty, our self-determination, and our inherent right to live as we choose, I should say. So we have an amazing panel of speakers here today. I'm co-moderating with my wonderful co-moderator, Lindsey. Go ahead and give a wave, Lindsey. And with further ado, I would like to jump right into it, and I'll pass it over to Lindsey, or we're going to do the introductions for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So
I'll go. Yeah, I can just introduce myself real quickly, and then we'll do a round robin. So Chokmas, I'll hold you for Lindsey. My name is Lindsey Bacigal, and I am the Communications Director at Indigenous Climate Action, which is the only Indigenous-led climate justice organization in so-called Canada. So thank you everyone for tuning in today to the third webinar of our 4-part webinar series, and I'll just let everyone else introduce themselves. So maybe we'll do to the left of my screen. So I have Leilani first. If you want to go ahead, tell the people who you are.
Hafaday, Guahusi, Leilani, Rania, Ganser. I am a Chamorro woman from Guahan's Jeje and Romeo clans. I also have roots as Kanaka Maoli in occupied Hawaii, in Aiea, and in the Bicol province of the Philippines. I am currently also the Grants and Impact Coordinator at the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
Great, thank you, Leilani. And maybe next, Hindou, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. It's so a great pleasure to be with all of you here. Jamnyali, Jamwali, on Fumodon. My name is Hindou Oumarou Ibrahim. I am from Chad. I am from Bororo peoples, who are indigenous nomadic pastoralists in Chad, a cattle herders communities. I'm leading a Indigenous Women and Peoples Association of Chad, and I am also members of the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, and as well very active on climate change, where I'm a member of all this Indigenous network, and now facilitating also as SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goal advocates.
Thank you, Hindou. Oh, excellent, I muted myself. Thanks, Hindou. Maybe Leo, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello, my name is Leo Cerda. I am indigenous from the Quechua community of Serena in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I am the director of the Haku Project, a small-led organization that works on advocacy and indigenous rights in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I'm happy to be here with you all.
Thanks, Leo. And finally, Ruth.
Yachlidu everyone, Shvek Isin Shiji, at Ruth Miller Shiji, a Kokasnan Shugu Shukai Kilanda, Inkerjatlin Shugu Yastura, Chikineklikidiki. My name in Denina is Shvek Isin, and my name in English is Ruth Miller. I'm a communications organizer for Native Movement, which is a grassroots Indigenous-led organization based out of my homelands in Alaska, but today I'm calling in from Salish Kootenai lands here on the Flathead Indian Res, and I'm so honored and humbled to be here with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. We have such a good panel lineup today. So just kind of to start us off, we thought that we would have everyone just have some space to speak about what the pandemic is kind of looking like in their communities right now, or the regions where they're from, however they want to identify that. And yeah, just kind of how we keep building up compassion and solidarity within the Indigenous rights movement right now, and what that can continue to look like, even though we can't necessarily meet in person right now, how we can still make sure that we're bringing that into all the work that we're doing and still really building up this movement. So we're going to go ahead and start with Hindou, who also has an amazing TED Talk. If you want to check it out, I very much recommend. So yeah, Hindou, if you just want to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Lindsey, and thank you for asking people to check the TED Talk, because that explains a lot of Indigenous peoples' views and vision on how we are living in harmony with our nature. So, as coming from Chad, who is a developing countries in the middle of Sahel, we are a landlocked. Then having this pandemic on COVID-19, or I don't know, the virus who is attacking all the world, we are the most vulnerable. Firstly, because we are in the landlocked and developing countries, and secondly, because we are coming from indigenous communities who are already marginalized on all the development system. When we just watch from the TV's informations, we saw the developed countries, the bigger one who have all the facilities, is struggling just to get access to the basic needs as masks, as ventilators. So we can't talk about those facilities in our land. The hospitals are becoming a big issue. Actually, we do not have any access to the hospitals. We do not have access to the schools, and people is still drinking the not clean water just from rivers and from the lake. So when someone do not have access to the clean water, so you can ask him to get access to another facility as washing them hands 5 or 10 times a day. So how we struggle there, we do have at the national level in the capital some cases. So government plan every day different decisions. We close all the market, all the public places are closed, all the work are closed. And at the end of the day, they say no one can go out from 7 p.m. to the 6 a.m. So everyone is stuck at home. But the paradox on it is we have more than 80% in the entire region. When I talk about Africa in general, or I talk about the Sahel regions, 80% of the community do not depend from the end of the month salaries. They depend from land, so agriculture, fisher, or livestock. And then those people need to go every single day to exchange them product in order to eat the next day. So when they say you do not go out, you have to stay home, it's not impacting just them daily life, but impacting the food of the people. In my community personally, the information are not reaching to them. When the government change each decision in every hours or 2-3 during the day, those information going through radios, through TVs, and sometimes through social media. But at the community, there is no radio. So we can't talk about TV or internet or whatever. And all the information are given in the major languages. So in chat, I speak Arabic and French. And the community speak our mother tongue full day. So they are completely cut from all the information that going out or in. And that's become another threat to the communities, because the policeman or the local authorities can just come and harass them, say you do not respect the law that's happening and you have to pay. So they abuse on them just by using them power. But they do not have only these information. That's the thing. And when also the government took the decision to share some of the money to buy soap or to support the vulnerable communities, so those are left behind who are us. Because if we do not have the information, how we can get access to those facilities. And the emergency, it's now. So for me, it's reminding us how we are getting stuck from all what is happening around the world. Firstly, we get excluded from our land, from our natural resources management. Secondly, we are the most vulnerable on climate change and all the biodiversity loss. And we are the one who are keeping it in safe for our entire life. And when one crisis comes, we are also the one who are left behind. So then at the end of the day, we say, where is our place in this earth with them in taking the decisions? So that's become a very huge issue. But as an Indigenous leaders, we cannot just stop there and cry with our eyes. So we stand up and help our peoples. That's what I'm doing back home. So I call each community chief to explain to them every single decision that's taken in the town. Because they do have sometimes access to the phone, sometimes the network cut, but I call them and explain to them. Firstly, ask the community to do not receive anyone coming from outside. Close your own door. If you do not have anyone that's coming, so maybe you can save yourself from any contaminations. And secondly, just be in solidarity among yourself. Don't go out to the market, because anyway, there is no market. They can abuse you, and you have just to take whatever that you have. But this is the hard part, because they don't have a self-sufficient in the communities to eat every day what they want. So then the struggle become a very, very high in where they are. So to respond to that, I'm just like try to draft a project that where I'm sending through 3 activities. One of them is how we can link up and give them the right information about what is this COVID-19 and how they can protect themselves from it by the barriers that they can apply. Secondly, it's giving them some health sanitation, like soap, some liquid that then they can use it. Maybe the people who can go out, who have to go out, can use some mask that we can just do in traditional way. And third one, it's how we can help them in the food security, maybe to give them the basic things that they can buy in the market, they used to buy, like onion, like some oils, some cereals that they cannot produce in the community. So we can give them, at least they can keep them for 1 or 2 weeks to do not go out. So I'm throwing these projects to give them. So the second part that I can share with you, it's not only impacting our communities back home, it's impacting the Indigenous people movement at all. Because having all of us together meeting at the international level, it is where we can exchange our knowledge, where we can exchange our experiences, where we can come in solidarity and build our movement back home. But this is close. So we just had our call as member of the permanent forum to take a very hard decisions to postpone the UN permanent forum on Indigenous issues. It is the only 2 weeks that we get all together and just talk with the state, tell them how we are feeling, what we are feeling. In our agenda was land management, was natural resource management, was and justice, and was also our own institutions, how they are work and how they can be improved as Indigenous institutions. But it's not going to happen this year. We are not going to meet. And it is the same for the climate change COP, who is postponed it. So if because of the virus, we are postponing all the decisions we are taking in our life, we say as Indigenous peoples, now you have to listen to us, because we taught them that it's happening. The Mother Earth is mad. We abuse on her. We extract all the resources, and who are becoming rich are those countries, and the left us behind trying to fix all the resources that lost. And then now they just like close everything down. So they have to listen from what indigenous people saying. If we cannot meet physically to have our own meetings, so the solution have to be built up in a different solidarity. One of them is this one. Thanks so much, Lindsey. And how you are putting us together is changing our knowledge. This is one way we can build the solidarity among our nations, among our leaders. What I'm listening here, I can share it back home. Even if I learn just one word from each of my sisters and brothers here, that can help me to build a resilience in my community. But we cannot build it if we cannot share it and tell all the government, all the private sector who abuse on others. We know what they are doing. We know that they are responsible on many things in this earth. And maybe if we protect our land territories, we cannot maybe come in this COVID, because themselves, they do not know where this virus is coming from, maybe from the world wild that they took the animals from them home and selling them in the market where it's not appropriate at all. Maybe they just wanted to produce some experiences where it's not appropriate. So we are not responsible on it. Everything is linked to the earth. Everything is linked to the resources. And every one of us are linked. So that's why our solidarity as indigenous peoples is very crucial to me, and having in this virtual meeting is very important. And we know exactly how we can draw up the solution back home when we go back through what we are experiencing through our media and our sharing here in virtual way. So thank you for this opportunity. I stop here for now and listen from my other sisters and brothers, and I will jump in again and share other experiences or solidarity with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hindou. I feel like I just want to like clap after that. Yeah, so good, yes. No, it's just very, yeah, it's very inspirational to, you know, hear you speak from all these different arenas, you know, thinking that we still need to keep building up our solidarity during this time, regardless of whether or not we're able to meet in person. We still need to be able to share knowledge amongst each other as Indigenous peoples and still find different ways to meet, so that, you know, we continue to work against these things like resource extraction in our communities. And also to your point at the beginning of all the different systemic issues and how we're seeing all these systemic issues really come to the surface right now, in terms of not having clean water, in terms of not having good health care or lack of access to health care. There are all these different arenas in which we really are facing these issues in our communities, and we have been for a very long time. And so now it's really through COVID that people are starting to see that, you know, they're also experiencing similar things to what we face, or many of our communities face on a day-to-day basis, of not having access to all of the essential services. So how important it really is to think about how we need to make sure that people have access to all these different things, to food, to water, to clean air, to energy, you know, all of these different things that we need in order to be able to survive. And even Indigenous peoples, what that means to us as well, in terms of not being able to gather, and how that's difficult for us too right now. And so thank you very much again, Hindou, for joining us and really being able to represent your voice and chat as well. So thank you for joining us. And maybe next, if we want to throw it over to Ruth. Ruth, if you want to maybe speak to your experience and your region right now and kind of what it's looking like.
So Yachlidu again, hello everybody. I am a Dena'ina Athabascan woman from the Chukchian tribe, which is in kind of the Lake Clark, Lake Iliamna area near Bristol Bay in Alaska in the south. But my work is engaged with communities all across Alaska, and of course with our incredible brothers and sisters in the international Indigenous spaces as well. And today I'm not calling in from my lands. As I said before, I'm on Salish Kootenai lands here, and I'm so grateful to be here, but it's also very painful to be away from home right now. It is an absolute privilege to have a safe space where I can go to isolate, but this is only, you know, a tiniest insight into the really drastic actions that our communities are taking to help protect particularly our elders right now. Alaska is extraordinarily vulnerable to the spread of epidemics, and we have very recent living memory of the last time our communities were devastated by disease brought by settlers. The 1918 epidemic, the Spanish influenza, wiped out our communities. It's said that the series of diseases before the influenza, and including the influenza, reduced our native population by 90%. And my great-grandmother was the last child of her village in the Bristol Bay region. And that living memory is still carried with us. And so when this pandemic began to rise on, in global media, our communities knew that we had to act and act fast. So our state has really taken to our community strengths of unity, the values that we have in preserving our elders and using our traditional knowledge to subsist and to survive as we always have. And so it's not to any credit of our state that our communities have been able to slow down the spread of the virus by isolating. This has been a really difficult process for us because, what we say in our old stories is that when settlers brought colonization, they also brought loneliness. We are accustomed to living in community. We are accustomed to being connected and to sharing dancing and singing and laughter and traditional foods, and to have to stay away from one another. Of course, it's a challenge for anyone. We all rely on community, but particularly for our traditional communities. As we're moving into spring, this is usually a time of celebration. It's a time of excitement when we're getting ready for our fishing season. And we are now having to introduce new steps to keep our communities safe. And so our youth, our Native organizations are really stepping up to make sure that our elders have what they need, but the best steps that we can take between our communities is isolation. So a lot of the travel to rural villages has been shut down, and there's a lot of concern that resources, that food supplies, that shipments will not be able to get out to those communities and will not be able to support them because of the threat that the virus might be alive on surfaces. And furthermore, if this disease does begin to touch our villages, we suffer an extraordinary amount of institutional racism and discrimination when it comes to not just healthcare, but also public safety. Our rural communities don't have access to hospitals and clinics oftentimes, and the clinics that we do have are notoriously underprepared. They do the best that they can with the limited resources that they have, but when something like this threatens our people, we just aren't equipped to service our Native community members the way that we should be, the way that other non-Native communities are able to protect themselves. And so we're really seeing some devastating divides in the resources, the healthcare resources that are given to our people. And our state and the federal government, as always, it seems, have really abandoned our Arctic communities in a number of ways. Firstly, a lot of the COVID-19 funding that is being made available, because the legislation was so rushed, they used language that defined tribes using a definition of the Self-Determination Act, which includes Alaska Native corporations. Now, this has been extremely controversial in Alaska because it's true that our corporations do a lot of important work through their nonprofit branches and provide services to a lot of the villages, but they are not tribes, because tribes are self-governing entities. And so when corporations are included within language and legislation that gives funding and jurisdiction to corporations as well as governments, we walk a dangerous line of undermining our autonomy and our self-determination that our tribes are due to. Now, furthermore, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium is not eligible for this federal funding that has supposedly been issued to help support tribal communities. And so we're seeing not just ignorance, but almost kind of willful negligence in the intricacies of tribal governance systems and what it means to be autonomous and what it means to be a tribal government who needs to take care of our own people during these times. The second way that our state and the federal government have abandoned us is by taking this opportunity to push through the permitting processes for development projects that devastate our lands, as if this pandemic, as if this forced isolation, as if the fear and the scarcity wasn't difficult enough. We are seeing an aggression that is just so underhanded, particularly in two of our regions. The first being the North Slope. Our Inupiaq relatives in the north are fighting against the Willow Lake project, and the Bureau of Land Management is holding public testimony hearings despite the fact that no one can leave their homes. And so this act of environmental racism is disabling our communities from voicing our needs and our demands on the management of our own lands. And it's endangering not just our lands and our waters, but the future of when we step out of this pandemic, of when we step out of this isolation, what type of environmental degradation will have been committed while we were doing all that we could to keep ourselves safe in isolation. So the fact that these Bureau of Land Management hearings are being held is just despicable. And so there's a lot of organizing around that. But secondly, the United Tribes of Bristol Bay in my region have also been fighting for decades against the proposed Pebble mine. And the Trump administration, under the guise of all the crisis that is happening, have, in short, withdrawn really important scientific study by the EPA that proved that not only documented our Indigenous experiences and our stories of how important the region is and the region's subsistence fisheries and watersheds are to us, but by withdrawing this study, they paved the way for the Pebble mine to push through their permitting process, again, while people are unable to provide testimony or protest in the same ways that we have been. And so we are seeing not just the fact that our communities are vulnerable to this health crisis, but that this health crisis is a proxy for the federal and state government to continue committing atrocities against our people, excluding us from the inherent right to govern our lands and waters and the future for our descendants. And so as Bristol Bay is struggling with the idea of having our commercial fishing season continue in this upcoming summer, we're also facing the threat of having our population multiply by 8 throughout the region as more and more outsiders come into the region to participate with the fishing industry. So we're seeing a huge amount of environmental racism in the way that this crisis is being managed at all. But coming back to compassion and what our communities are doing, we are prepared for crises. I wish that this wasn't true, but we are not unaccustomed to suffering and the types of demands that our future descendants need of us in these times. And so we've seen an incredible rise in advocacy. We have seen a wonderful rise in community support, especially using media. You know, not all of Alaska has access to the internet or to television, but those that do have really risen on Facebook to create dance groups and singing groups, to, as Lindsey was mentioning before, Indigenous art markets and things like that. All centered on the fact that we are getting through this together, that we are using community as our basis for care of one another, but also care for ourselves. And so during this time of isolation, I think many of us are focused on reflection, thinking about, you know, in the midst of such terrifying times when we have this generational trauma and this pain so raw because we remember plagues, we remember this loss, what can we do? How can we equip ourselves and supply ourselves with the powerful ancestral knowledge that we have to come out of this stronger? How can we use this time, although we can't gather, especially in these international communities that Hindou reminded us are so crucial? What can we do to prepare? Because we cannot go back to what was normal before this. We won't. And this is a time of great transformation. This is a time of potential. And I think that it's our Indigenous communities that are showing us what radical compassion looks like in a time of pandemic. We are caring for our elders. We are using our ancestral knowledges, our traditional life ways to bring us closer to the land, to bring us closer to one another, even if we can't be together in person. So I'm really excited to continue this conversation. I know I just threw a lot out there, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. This is a hard time. It's not natural. It hurts to be separated from people, but look at all that we're creating, you know, and how much stronger and more powerful and more determined are we going to be when we can gather at the next COP, or when we can go back on our lands. You know, the world is really revealing some dark rifts that we've known have been there for a long time, but now they're really being exposed to the rest of the world too. So how can we work together as Indigenous stewards, as Indigenous leaders, to bring the rest of the world along? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for the words you shared. I think you just laid out really what a lot of Indigenous communities are faced with, right? Is that we're trying to process and mitigate the spread of this virus within our own communities. At the same time, we're still defending our borders from extractive industries, from mainstream society, from oil and gas development, from various forms of colonialism. And so it's a multi-layered task that a lot of our leaders have been doing, but it's not elevated to a whole new level because of the crisis of the actual pandemic itself. And thank you for bringing your knowledge and experience, and also the voices of those in the Arctic region, and specifically in Alaska, into this space here. I want to go over to Leo at this time. Leo, thank you for being with us. So we're our minds, our bodies, our spirits, we're up in Alaska. Now we're going to be going down south to Ecuador to hear from Leo here. So please, Leo, share with us your knowledge and experience of what's going on there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leo Cerda. I'm from the Quechua community of Cerda in the Ecuadorian Amazon. As for all of testimonials, we can see that we Indigenous peoples are the first one to be at the forefront of the fight against climate change, but also we are the first one to be suffering the consequences of this emergency like this, such as COVID. We suffer from institutional racism against Indigenous people all over the planet. And in Ecuador, where I am from and I am right now, we cannot trust the government reaction or response to COVID-19, especially with Indigenous communities. In Ecuador especially, there are not given real data about like infections and transmissions or deaths. We have a big death toll. In my hometown, there are 2 Indigenous people that already passed away that were not on the official data. So I feel this is a time, and we as Indigenous people, we have to take action into our hands and see what are the ways that we can prevent this pandemic from going to our communities, and what are the mitigation processes for our communities as well. The regional organization for Indigenous people in the Ecuadorian Amazon started, as soon as this started, they just sent out protocols for Indigenous communities to prevent this from spreading in our own languages. We have 11 different ethnic groups in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and we have the protocols in 11 languages. Also, they are forming kits for families in need, but also we have to take into account the Indigenous people who live in urban areas, who do not have access or ways to go back to their communities. How are we supporting these communities? I think we have to see. We are seeing this as in 3 different steps. One, the first thing is prevention. You know, how are we stop like the spread of the virus, or have a different language, and then mitigation. What are we doing with indigenous people who are left in the cities? What are we doing with indigenous people who are being transmitted with this disease, or how are we support? And the third one is like long-term, what are we doing this long-term to prevent this from happening again? Or if we cannot prevent this from happening, how are we building resilient communities? I think this is a time, and we can make a shift of paradigm for not only for indigenous people, but for the whole world. Because what is happening right now is like, we have to see how are we responding to this with the indigenous knowledge, how are we like self-sufficient, resilient, food sovereignty, all of these things. There is one big example in Ecuador. There is one indigenous nation in the coast of Ecuador that was able to bring in 90 tons of food to their communities and supporting other local economies, other local community economies. So yeah, I think we're seeing like different projects right now, especially in Ecuador and in the Amazon. How are we as communities are supporting each other across from the Amazon to the Andes to the coast, and supporting each other. The other thing I think that we haven't discussed is like how to democratize direct funding. You know, because in the Amazon we have indigenous communities and we have organizations. However, then like they have these different platforms to have access to funds. And then where are those funds? You know, when we as I remember, when the fires happened in Brazil, there were like a couple $1 million that were out there that were be sent to Brazil, and then the people in the local communities didn't receive those funds. Where are those funds stuck? So we also have to think as international indigenous organization, how are we gonna be democratizing the access to those funds for indigenous communities that are in need? You know, this is a collective fight. This is a collective fight, and we are here to support and protect each other in our communities. And this is the time to make policy for our indigenous communities, international policy, because what is going to happen after this pandemic is over? The government are scarce of money resources right now. They're going to start logging. They're going to start open gold mining in the Amazon. They just the government a month before the pandemic started, they auctioned off the land of my community, of my indigenous territory, to be explored for gold mining. And after that, was where the governments are going to get their resources from? Indigenous resources, you know, from our villages, our forests. And also right now, to talk about how are we protecting, we are left out there, you know, illegal loggers, illegal miners. The government is promoting them, and they're coming to our communities with a free pass from the government, because they say we have to keep working for the common of the country. But if we allow that to happen, there are still people coming from outside, coming to our territories and spreading the virus into our communities. So there are a couple things that we need to think about. I just want to say that in Ecuador, there are efforts that indigenous communities are doing. So, for example, like as I said, the Indigenous Regional Organization set up this prevention protocols in 11 different languages. Right now, I'm working with a local indigenous group in the coast that they are building protocols for indigenous communities, but also hiring doctors, you know, making sure they have the necessary equipment that to support their local communities, because they're being very, very affected in this pandemic out there in the coast. Also, what we're proposing for the future is like how we make resilient communities. How are we going to make that happen? So this is just about time to start that discussion and take action into our hands as communities and say, okay, we're going to build these resilient communities, and this is how we're going to make it, and just shift everything. And talking about international gatherings and such as the COP and stuff, I was at the last COP. Nothing happened. You know, I think those spaces are ridiculous. This is about time that we as indigenous organizations, as indigenous nations from all across the world, we start reinventing ourselves, making our own policies, and setting up the line for others to come along and tag along. You know, they have to follow our policies, because right now we're looking at the world. This whole thing is caused by capitalism and their urge for destroying the world, for, you know, and destroying our natural resources. Like, okay, let's go back to our indigenous ways and rebuild, like shift this paradigm and rebuild a new society, and that we can all survive, you know.
Thank you. Each and every one of you has been doing, like, you're just like bringing it all together. I think that oftentimes when we think about crisis, we get tunnel vision, right? We only focus on one thing, and, you know, whether it's, oh, we need face masks, or you need this, you know, you need these certain things. But the reality is a lot of our communities are used to, like, understanding the attacks are coming from numerous places. And so it's essential for us as we respond to this to really connect the dots, as what Leo, you're pointing out, is like a lot of this is all connected. You know, the climate crisis to well, let me put it this way. And this is a reaction to everything that people have said here, and also kind of pushing back at some of the misinformation. I think a lot of times people are, when they talk about the higher instances of infection from COVID-19 in communities of color, they come from a perspective, an assumption that, oh, it's because they're indigenous, that's why they have a higher instance of getting sick. Or it's because they're Black, they get a higher instance of being sick, or because they're Native. And that's a racist ideology. It's not because we're indigenous, it's because the conditions of our living experience and the conditions of colonialism has caused us to be more susceptible to disease and infection. Is caused us to have inadequate healthcare systems. Has caused us to have food insecurity. And so we're at a disadvantage in responding to this, not of our own choosing, but because of settler states and colonization. And so I think that's what we're really hearing from the folks. That's what I'm hearing for a lot of folks, is like we were responding to the moment, but that moment is housed in this greater context of colonization, globalization, and what you specifically called out, capitalism. So thank you for bringing that to the space. I want to make a note that we are going to have a moment for Q&A. So please, if you have a question for our panelists here, do this, type it in, and we'll try to respond to it in due time. Please share the link as much as you can so other folks can watch this. And we're not done yet. We're also going to come back because we have some follow-up questions and conversations with our panelists. But I'm going to pass it over to my co-moderator, Lindsey, to introduce us to our last speaker here.
Yeah, finally we have Leilani, who's also been part of an awesome project lately that she's going to touch on. But yeah, just to speak to Leo's points as well, we were kind of having a quick little check-in before this call got started, and we were saying how, you know, the price of oil right now has dropped so low in so-called US and so-called Canada. And so what that means for, you know, all of these essential workers in resource extraction, you know, still going into our communities, still going into our territories, and extracting. And, you know, what basically, you know, as to what we've been saying for so long as Indigenous people, saying, no, keep it in the ground. Like, it doesn't make sense to keep extracting from the earth. So why do we keep doing this? You know, it's further proving the point that the oil and gas industry is a dying industry, and this isn't something that we should keep doing, and people should not keep, you know, going onto our lands and our territories. Leo, do you have a point?
You know, the barrel of oil is just less than $2 in today. So, you know, it's a time for a shift.
Time for a shift, that's right. I think also time for a shift for us to Leilani. So Leilani, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, hafa day, everyone. Gwahusi Leilani Rania Ganser. As I said before, I am a Oumarou and Kanakamaoli woman. I am from the Romeo and JJ clans of Guahan. But I am also a guest in Washington, D.C., or in Acuchitink and Piscataway land. So I'm going to sort of address both of those aspects of the situation and the pandemic that I find myself in. One is not being in my home, not being among my family and friends who are going through a really particularized form of violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I'll come back to what that means to me as a diaspora Indigenous person who is a guest on other Indigenous lands during this crisis. So, as I mentioned, I'm in DC now, and the last time I was in DC, a lot of the world's eyes were on Guam for what felt like one of the first times in my life. And it was because we were the target of a nuclear weapon. And that usually tends to be how lately I see Guam's, my island in the news. Lately, I saw Guam in the New York Times as an island oasis where a ship called the USS Roosevelt is currently parked. Guam is a beautiful island. It's, I believe, 20 by 30 miles, just about. A little more than 100,000 people on the island. And we're currently being used to quarantine a lot of those soldiers. There was an outbreak on the USS Roosevelt that has killed one sailor. It was in the headlines quite a bit because the captain of the ship was fired for, I believe, what was seen as an overreaction to the situation on board. He has since tested positive for COVID. It's difficult because more than 25% of Guam is U.S. military access, is occupied by base land. The soldiers are also being quarantined, not just on the base though. They're also being quarantined in local hotels. And I work in nonprofit journalism, and I've been watching the press conferences from back home, trying to understand. And at first we were told that only soldiers who tested negative would be housed in quarantined in these hotels. But the commanders have gotten less clear about that. And I think there's been a directive since that the military is no longer reporting specific infection numbers on its bases. So that doesn't just include places like Guam. The US has, I think, more than 600 bases abroad, including in its territories in the Pacific and the Caribbean. So this is the way it affects a lot of people. Also in Okinawa, this is an issue. So Guam is one of 17 of the UN's recognized non-self-governing territories. Many of those are in Africa, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. And many of these are also places where there are significant military installations. There tends to be limitations politically in these areas. And one of the things that's important about these areas being around military installations is it's not just the COVID crisis that's happening there. So on top of not being able to have a say by the Indigenous and local population in the quarantining and the rights and the response to the COVID crisis. One of the issues is that in one of my homes of Hawaii, RIMPAC, one of the largest military demonstrations and practices in the world, is still scheduled to occur. Meanwhile, there have been sweeps of houseless people in Hawaii. And in Guam, there was recently an elephant walk. An elephant walk is, in this case, it was 16 aircrafts, including Stratobombers. I think those are B-4s. But, sorry, military folks. Yeah, those were elephant walked. They were all launched at once as a display of force and capacity in the Indo-Pacific region. So a lot of our elders, and in Guahan, many of them are survivors of the World War II occupation of Guam by Imperial Japan. Many of our elders are now facing this new threat on top of what is a traumatic experience, something that people don't always take into account is there's been a lot of talk about pollution and the earth getting a chance to recover. One of the worst parts I would say of these military installations is the noise pollution. And the way that these constant sounds and mechanisms are going to affect the immunity and the immune responses, the spirits of the people who are living and surviving with them. But one of the other things is I'm not home now. I'm a diaspora Chamorro. I have not gotten to live on Guahan the way that my family has. And so one of the things that I really struggle with, especially during this time, is what it means to be Indigenous when I'm not currently on the land that birthed me. I'm not with Fu'una, I'm not with my ancestor. And so living in Piscataway land now, I really feel like I need to approach things by being in good relation with the people here, with the oppressed populations here. And as we've sort of addressed this in the US, this disease has a particular mortality rate for Pacific Islanders, Black Americans especially. The mortality rates for Black Americans have been horrific and abominable. Hispanics, Latinx folks, as well as Native folks. And it's not because there's something wrong with us, with these people. It's because there are pre-existing conditions, comorbidities that haven't been addressed yet. Things like higher rates of diabetes. Again, with the military issues, a lot of us are also going to be in areas, there are a lot more than you think, in Indigenous and Black American communities of pollution, like on the Wind River Reservation, where a lot of our Manyalu, Messiah and Little Wind have done their own mutual aid organizing. There's the issue of uranium mining that affects the health of people. In Guahan, we've been exposed firsthand to the US's radiation, its nuclear weapons tests. We're also an Agent Orange storage site, things like that. And that's something that unfortunately I have in common with a lot of the other Indigenous nations that exist here in Turtle Island. And one of the ways that I've been very, very, very lucky to give back and establish myself in good relation is with the help of where I work now. I'm at Pulitzer Center on crisis reporting. I have been since January. And I was really lucky to be a part of a years-long investigation. At the tail end, I've gotten to do some of this work, getting to share this with other Indigenous folks. It's a project by Bobby Lee and Tristan Ayton of the Kiowa Nation, called Land Grab University, where they were able to take research and overlay Indigenous land cessions and how they were exploited, sold, and made into the seed money of the American university system. We are actually having a webinar on that tomorrow at, oh boy, I think it's either 1 or 2 p.m. I'm sorry, I'm horrible with linear time. Someone will correct me It's at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow at pulitzercenter.org. Going to be talking about what the Memorial Act is, which is two sweeping acts that granted 52 universities indigenous land that was backed by violence, taken back by violence. And it's really created the formation of America's biggest schools. Cornell is the university that received most of that land. So I've been using the database at landgrabu.org to retrace where I've been in Turtle Island and try and actually reach out to those nations whose land I'm occupying. I also traced where the university I studied at got its start, and have reached out to those nations to try and come in good relation in Chinchuli, which is a Chamorro practice to give a gift. I've been going through and trying to offer a gift for those nations who have been hosts of me, which again is the Piscataway Nation right now. So I've really been looking into that, not only as a way of producing empathy among me and other Indigenous groups during this crisis, but just because as an Indigenous woman myself, and in previous traumas, I've never been through something so global as this, but in previous traumas that deeply affected me, deeply affected my nation and my family and my spirit, the thing that has been most helpful for me, and the way that I find my indigeneity at its most powerful, is when I practice research and storytelling as part of my ceremony. It really gives me a sense of strength to look back at not just my history, but the history of the people also that are still here. My people in Guahan have survived several waves of disease, waves of genocide, and other attempts to wipe us out. And it's a sense of optimism and a sense of, in Chamorro it's called mahaleng. It's a deep melancholy that comes with a knowledge of the past that I think is also a form of respect. So that is what I've been doing, and I'm happy to be here with everybody else. Sitsuas Masi Sainamasi for listening.
Thank you, Leilani, for your contribution and bringing your voice into the space. I know that a number of our speakers have a couple other things that they wanted to talk about, and I wanted to preface this as a note to the speakers. Lindsey or myself may interject at times just to help move the conversation forward. We only have about a half hour left, so we want to make sure that we are able to move forward in a good way on different topics and everyone gets a chance to speak. So if you see me put my hands up like that, put my hand up, that means kind of to give you a little nudge and we can move on to our maybe question and response. I also like conversational kind of setups. So if someone says something that really speaks to you as a speaker, please feel free to chime in. I want to ask Ruth. This is a question for Ruth. A lot of our, I know that in North America, in so-called North America, a huge issue that has been on the rise for generations now, but has really come to the forefront of our struggle, is murdered and missing Indigenous women, and the instances of the high risk of violence against women in Indigenous communities. So maybe can you share a little bit about your thoughts and how that relates to the current COVID-19 crisis?
Absolutely. This has been a huge aspect of organizing before this pandemic even arose, but especially now. Just to give folks a bit of a background, if you're not familiar, what we call in Turtle Island missing and murdered Indigenous women, what's known in Latin America and South America as femicidio, it's a disproportionate violence that is enacted against Native women. Every statistic has told us again and again that Indigenous women are targeted at far greater rates than any other demographic for homicide, for assault, for rape. But we don't need those statistics to tell us what we already know. We feel it in our stories. We feel it in the pain of missing those we love. And this is a burden that we collectively carry amongst our communities. And it is an issue that has only grown exponentially, not only as development has violated our lands and waters, as those who pursue development violate our bodies, but of course in times of isolation, when it seems that so many of the gains that we've won are being suspended. Of course, we really deeply fear for our women in rural communities now who might be locked at home with an abuser, or might be in other forms of unsafe situations. So not only do we carry the institutional racism of criminal justice systems that are unavailable to our Indigenous women who are neglectful of our suffering and who often leave perpetrators unprosecuted, but we are also struggling with the racism of our healthcare institutions that that are unable to provide resources to these women during these times. So a lot of what organizing has looked like has been sending as many resources as we can to women and other community members who are also in vulnerable situations, which means supporting our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ community as well, thinking about what resources, what information, what types of emotional support can be provided, but also things for reproductive health care like condoms and menstrual products. So thinking about how we can fill the gaps that our state and federal government continues to leave totally void. So thinking about community safety during times of pandemic, we also have to think, you know, as you, Dallas, and Leilani had mentioned earlier, what structural problems are being exacerbated, what types of underlying factors put our communities and our people at a disadvantage that are getting worse in this time of crisis, which has almost encouraged even greater negligence to our most vulnerable.
I think it's a great point. I think a lot of folks have mentioned this, like there's a lot of concern right now about what is our opposition doing under the radar while everyone's responding and talking about the crisis, right? And you know, you pointed out there is a link between extractive industry and increased instances of violence within our communities, especially the violence perpetrated against women and children. And so it's absurd. I think it's absurd, absolutely disgusting, that we're seeing oil companies still pushing to do development, do projects under the radar of a pandemic, you know, and putting our communities even more at risk. I want to go over the Hindou. Can we talk a little bit about like this understanding of funding and the relationship of like how so each country had in the process of the international processes of the COP, the Conference of Parties. Most folks may not know it, but it's a United Nations framework discussion that basically how are the countries of the world going to come together to address the climate change, the problems of climate change. And there's sustainable development goals. So each country has these goals. What's happening right now, and how are we holding countries accountable in the current terms? Like I've seen people talk about like, well, let's suspend all those rules. Let's not talk about all this stuff. Let's just deal with the pandemic. I guess one question maybe is, what's the effect of that? And maybe any other thoughts you might have about that.
Sure. Thank you. Firstly, thanks, Sister Ruth. You really touched in very important point, because many people talking about the violence against women during this pandemic, but they do not know how the violence can be very increased in Indigenous communities, especially about women and girls. So coming back to the funding issues, just to link it up with the COVID. So when the crisis started, after just some weeks for some countries and 1 month maximum for others. They took a huge decision to inject a lot of money in the COVID. And this is the case of US with $2,000 billion. Europe, $1,000 billion. And we know China and others. So all of them just stand up in less than a month to put a lot of money into the economy. And this economy is for them, is the industry. All of them say how they can help them company to continuously produce whatever that they are producing. So it's not investing on the real issues that we want. So when we come back to the climate change, we struggle and fight and go at the street and protest and do all our best just to claim 100 billions a year for climate change. That's it. But they never put this money in the table. But if it's affecting direct themselves, we are seeing how they can just rushing and going to the bank and printing the money, injecting in the industry. So I won't talk about this injustice about funding when it is touching the real peoples and then the real objective of the war. They are not there at all. But when it's touched them, they just stand up and wanted to save them us. So this is the big issues and big injustice that's happening. How they can turn it and doing it in a right way, because we still have time. These thousands of billions of dollars around the world can serve for the real purpose. They can serve the peoples. And this where is the sustainable development goals come. We all agree, I mean, all the countries, if I say we, is the entire world, that leaders agrees to set up the 17 goals. And we all know one of them is health. If they invest good on all these 17 without breaking them and without just choosing whatever that can work for them, I think we cannot come in these situations. So they can invest this money on Sustainable Development Goal agenda. We have 10 years from now to 2030 to achieve those objectives. So we cannot get the excuse there is no money to do that. And the good things on this objective, it's leaving no one behind. And indigenous people are part of those peoples to leave do not one behind. And if they wanted to put this money in our educations, in our health system, in environment protections, in our land, in our waters, because when we say water, it's fresh water, but it's also seawater for the peoples who are in the island. And Rania said very well. So if those money can help all the peoples who are left behind to build them resilience, I think they can do it for the right way. But if they want to invest this money in the industry again and the company because they are feared that they lack on the money, I think they are going to the right way. So what we can do as indigenous peoples now, we do have all those informations. So it's just to being all together to share these informations as much as possible. If those countries are going to inject the money, they have to inject it in the right way. They cannot just... Go ahead.
Well, I want to ask Leo about this, if we get his input on this. I have a fear, a concern that because the price of oil has dropped, right, and the ancient, like the world depends right now on oil. We live by a fossil fuel regime, right? And the concern I have is that countries of the world, including those in the developed countries as well as developing countries who have vast storage or vast amounts of fossil fuel, are going to say, look, we don't have the money, so we have to extract more and more and more. And I know the Amazon is a key part of that. They want to see more oil and fossil fuel development there. What is the concerns you have as the countries in South America are trying to respond to the crisis and trying to find resources, as what Hindou's talking about? Like, they want to talk about how are we going to deal with the COVID-19 crisis as well as deal with the issues of climate change. What are the concerns that you have?
Maybe before Leo, just let me jump on this to say, so when they have all this money, they cannot get the excuse that there is no solutions, because they cannot say that the oil is going down, we are going to extract it, because they are the one who put all the strategy on how the company from the car can just shift on 2 days to produce ventilators. So those companies of oil can shift immediately to do the renewable energy where we already have it, all the technology in our hand. So they can change the investment to go to the right way and let all our resources down. But I of course, my brother Leo can say it maybe more better than me.
Thank you, Hindou. I think we are all worried about natural resource extraction because the world definitely is will want to use their getting back into their economy to extract more resources. That's why we're saying like we need to make a shift. And what happened in Ecuador is that when the emergency just started, one of the biggest oil pipelines in Ecuador got damaged because of a erupting volcano, and it contaminated one of the biggest rivers going into the Amazon, and that increased that became a huge challenge for indigenous people. So now we're saying like, you know, we don't have a way to respond to that. Like the government didn't have any way to respond to clean up or that. And we're now going to the major crisis of our time. How are we going to do in order to respond to those things? How are we going to make a shift of paradigm? Instead of a resource extraction, we need to find better ways to use green energy and protect the forests and the resources that we need. Because right now, a lot of people do not have access to goods or anything. Where we're looking is that, oh, we have to go back. What do you have in your garden? If you're not indigenous, you don't have any access to anything, and even more so if your land is polluted. So I think it's about time that we basically impose our policies to tell the government we are not extracting resources. We are building resilient communities across the Amazon, from the south to from the Amazon to the Antarctic. We have to be ready for the next pandemic. So going on resource extraction is not happening. You know, is not the answer to coronavirus or to the capitalism world, you know. So I think we have to take a big stand after coronavirus and said we're going back to our indigenous practices.
There was a point you made earlier as well, Leo, that I found that I found really interesting too, around like funding and access too, about how now is, you know, we're seeing a lot more funding become accessible in certain arenas through certain folks. Like I know IEN has a regranting thing happening right now. That's something that ICA does as well, regranting for frontline orgs, and how, you know, it's even thinking about how can we shift that world of philanthropy and regranting right now. Sorry, Ruth, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I just, you know, I almost feel like I want to say, like, I told you so to all these major development corporations. We just got the news this morning that Citigroup released their ruling out financing for some development projects in the Arctic, including the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So let's saying, Leo, like, it is Indigenous stewardship that has been preaching the importance of preserving our natural lands as they came to us. And we're seeing the collapse of these development corporations through the lens of this pandemic that will only, you know, continue to be made clear. So I told you so.
Yeah, I think also our communities are woke about like natural resource extraction. And so it's like, this is what is happening. What are we living? How are we living right now? How are we surviving this emergency? It's because we have access to our lands, to our clean water, and those communities who don't, they are devastated. So I think there is going to be an after pandemia and before pandemia for indigenous communities who are resistant in the forefront of the fight against climate change.
I wanted to apologize, Hindou. I actually the mistaking what you were saying, and I really appreciate your note. You're saying what you brought up. You're right. They don't have an excuse. They can't say, "Oh, we don't have the money," if they come up with trillions and billions of dollars to boost their own economy. That's the issue. And the United States is the perfect example for that, right? They say numerous times, we don't have the money to deal with our debt, our climate debt, and yet they can come up with trillions of dollars like that to bail out fossil fuel companies and airlines. It's ridiculous, and it just shows you the insidious behavior of capitalism and how it works, right? If it doesn't benefit the goals of capitalism, then it doesn't matter. I think that's really the approach to it. So we have about 15 minutes left, and then I wanted to take a time to see if there's any questions from our chat that people have asked. Lindsay, or is Jennifer's on here? She's monitoring.
Yeah, we do have some questions that we've gotten through Facebook. I'm trying to think of, what would kind of be the best one to kind of, wrap things up, I suppose. I think I always kind of like ending on a bit more of like a forward thinking way. So somebody asked, how do you give hope to your children? It doesn't have to be children specifically in this case, but, I'd be kind of interested about what folks think in terms of, forward thinking, like how can we use this movement to keep, building up momentum or use this moment in time to keep building up momentum, for our movements. How do we make it through this? I think we've, touched on it a little bit, but I guess more of on a positive end note, how do we see ourselves moving forward?
Yeah. Leilani, do you want to I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love moving forward. That's something that I struggle with being. I'm immunocompromised due to an autoimmune condition. And one of the ways that I've been so inspired is by Indigenous people within their communities who are creating these mutual aid groups. So I mentioned our Manyelu, our siblings in the Wind River Reservation, but there's also a group in Guahan called Para Todos Hip. And they are addressing a lot of the issues that have faced Guam, not just before this crisis, but or not just during this crisis, but before, and likely will continue. One of the big issues is that one of the average prices of rent for a one-bedroom in Guam is $1,300 a month. And the minimum wage there is $8.75 an hour. So 33% of Guam's workforce works in tourism and its supporting industries. That brings in $1.4 billion every year to not Guahan, but typically the US. And 52% of those on Guahan are renters. So I'm really grateful for these mutual aid groups, but I struggle with knowing where I fit in just because that's not something that I feel like I'm as able to do. My work is as a storyteller still, and as someone who works in journalism, and I think that the best thing I can do going forward is be someone who's willing to listen to stories, being someone who has empathy, and being someone who shares those stories when I have the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Leilani. Yeah, I think that the idea of storytelling is something that's really important right now, in addition to all the mutual aid. As someone who works in comms, like organizing these webinars and whatnot, that was kind of one of the things we thought of when organizing was, how can we continue to share information out, to continue to bring people together, even in a digital sphere right now. So thank you for all your work in that. Maybe Ruth, do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, something that we always talk about in our climate justice organizing is that, we are all one climate crisis away from being in need. These are equalizing factors that, of course, disproportionately affect our Black and Brown and poor communities. But it's this moment of I think the world taking a collective gasp and then maybe a sigh of, wow, who knew something like this could happen that would so drastically change our day to day. But if we take this global pandemic as a proxy, as a fire drill for the climate crisis, I see mostly what I see is opportunity and potential for the creation of beautiful things. I think that the ways that we have seen not just our Indigenous communities persevere, but our individuals create with so much love, the things that we're seeing our brothers and sisters do to uplift one another, to talk about what self-care looks like in these times. It shows me that we have our medicines, we have our healing. It's a matter of willingly stepping away from these cyclical wheels of capitalism that convince us we have to be productive in a specific way, convince us that we have to contribute to labor in a specific way. How can this be a time of intense personal healing for each of us that will carry our communities into greater preparedness and greater compassion for one another? What will it look like the next time something like this happens? So how do we use the medicines that our Indigenous communities have always carried with us in times like this, to grow stronger, to grow more resilient, and to grow more joyful, more compassionate, more kindness? You know, we have the answers, we have our medicine, and this is our time.
Yeah, I really like that point around medicines and different cultural practices right now. In our last webinar, we talked about different traditional practices and how people are keeping up with them right now. And some folks local to here in Ottawa, they've been seeing an increase actually in their Anishinaabe classes. So it's really cool how maybe even during this time, a lot more folks are kind of, going back and starting to try and become a bit more connected to their culture as well. Carly also on that webinar mentioned, in terms of beading, thinking about different intentions when you're beading, like putting in that, those feelings of, hope and moving forward while you're doing that. So, yeah.
This is the most beading I've gotten done in
years. Right. Very important cultural practices right now, keeping us grounded. Maybe Leo, do you want to go next? Your hopes for moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. My shirt says, "We are the resistance," and I do feel like we are the resistance. We've been resistance for time immemorable. So yeah, going back to our roots, our practices. Me, I had to like personally as a young Indigenous, not that young, but like as a not that young Indigenous person, I've been like rethinking what I'm doing with my life as an activist, as a member of my community, where I am like, I'm like really shifting my mind towards like, what are we going to do to rebuild this resilient community that's towards the future and be more fraternal with our next community, where maybe would not have much resources, or what we can exchange, or our knowledge, our practices, everything. I think this is a time now that we have to take action and move forward to build a more like fraternal, resilient community for us and for the world and our fellow country people. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen after this, and how we're going to move forward. And thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, definitely thinking of, situating ourselves right now. Even I know that for many folks that I know, that a lot of us are really thinking more and more about, where do I fit in my community? What can I do right now? What makes the most sense for me? Not all of us can be on the front lines, and people are required in different areas and different arenas. So, how can I best use my skills during this time and even moving forward? So I think a lot of us are kind of going through that reevaluation process right now. And finally, Hindou, your hopes for moving forward?
Yeah, my hope is based on 3 levels. Firstly, it's what Ruth said very well, in the community level. I'm seeing that all the community, even without the corona, we don't have access to the hospital. And when now we are seeing that even those who have hospitals, they are failing because they can't get the medicine that they need. So we are coming back to value our knowledge more, because in my community, we have our own traditional vaccine. When each season comes, when like it is the end of the rain season, it's the cold season coming in, we take our medicine in an exact time according to the star, according to the moons, a breakfast with like honey or milk or whatever that we have in each season. And that's helped us to prevent from the pandemic that's coming during the season. It could be like a cold, it could be like malaria or whatever. So now it can help us to value more our knowledge and continues our traditions to figure out how the traditional knowledge can be transferred to the next generation, because they are very valuable, that those science knowledge who are not confirmed. The second level is having this kind of team, having the indigenous peoples across all the continents, across the communities, across different, nations that we have, who can come together. We are becoming more strong, even we are not meeting physically, because I'm chatting and talking with many other indigenous peoples, and we're trying to have the webinars. I hear what you are doing, Lindsey, what's tomorrow Leilani is doing, and all of us, how we are building up and becoming more strong. This is a big hope that indigenous peoples cannot be stopped, even there is not a physical meeting. That's a big hope for me we can change. And then the last level is seeing the outside world. So when you see the outside people who are not indigenous, who used to be like an individual in them life, they just are trying to call them relative. They are starting greeting them neighbors. In DC, you can tell me that. And then just like trying to chat with whatever that, they are becoming back to be a human being as normal. They are valuing living in community, even it's not them community. Maybe they can think to go beyond an individual rights, how they can respect and value the collective rights that indigenous peoples have forever. So those three levels giving me more hope. Maybe we can transform the world and live in better harmony among ourselves with our heirs after this pandemic. Get adapt to ourselves. It's not going to leave us, but after we get adapt to it. And thank you very much for having me. And thanks to all my brothers and sisters here. I learned a lot from you. I love you so much. And then hopefully we will come back again. Thanks, Lindsey.
Thank you so much, Hindou, and to each and every one of you for bringing your knowledge here and sharing it with us. We know that you're in this space, not just speaking as individuals, but as representatives from the various communities that you're working with or are a part of. And, we work from a space of community and not a space of individualism. And I have a lot of, it is crazy to see people coming back together. And there's one thing I've noticed is that this crisis has really caused people to question or to elaborate on their relationship to the land. There's a lot, people are having conversations about their relationship to the land, where their food comes from, how are they getting access to their food, how are they securing their borders or their land and their communities. All these conversations are coming up, and from us, from a perspective of an indigenous perspective, that's something that we always walk with, is our relationship to land. So I think that if anything that is causing a change in society, that I hope is for the benefit. That people can come out of this with a greater understanding of land issues, but also understanding the special relationship indigenous communities have with our land. That's the wrap up. This is the end of this webinar. A lot of folks on this interview, the panelists here have left different links. They've talked about different things. We've put a lot of those URL links in the Facebook page event for this webinar. So if you're interested about the organizations that folks are working from, or some of the things that they talked about, go check out the event page. This will be saved so you can watch it later, you can share it later. Definitely encourage you to share it to all your relatives as much as possible. Knowledge is power, and let's empower our people to build stronger, sustainable Indigenous nations and societies. So thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge the Indigenous Environmental Network, as well as Indigenous Climate Action, for working together to bring this to you at this time. And we'll be back next week on Monday to have on the fourth part of our four-part series, focus on storytelling. So thank you at this time, and we say, Doksha Ke, goodbye.